The first era of like American history is like the founding to 1830. And this is a time period in which it tends to favor like a stronger like national government. No surprise, right? You're coming off the Articles of Confederation system, super weak national government, and the immediate reaction is to go the opposite way. So for the first part of our country's history, you really begin to see like the emergence of a stronger like national government. You definitely can see this reflected in Supreme Court decisions during the time period. The person pictured on the screen is the fourth Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. That's John Marshall, but in my opinion, he's probably one of the two most significant Chief Justices. He serves from 1801 to 1835, which is almost the entire time during this time period. And he's still today the longest serving Chief Justice in American history. His background convinces him that a stronger national government is like best, and that definitely works its way into his court's like sort of like verdicts and decisions during this time period. He was an aide to Washington, George Washington, at Valley Forge, and he saw sort of like the suffering that resulted with the Continental Army when you had a weak government that was unable to provide for its army and its citizens, and it proved to be sort of a very formative moment in his life. So he learns that lesson, and he sort of is advocating for a stronger national government through many of his decisions as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. A couple of his decisions that occur during this time period that tend to benefit the national government: Marbury versus Madison, which is pretty significant, that occurs in 1803. That gives the Supreme Court the ability to have judicial review, which is not something that's actually mentioned in the Constitution. This actually gives the Supreme Court itself like the ability to declare laws by Congress and actions of the president unconstitutional. I mean, making the third branch of the national government like pretty important and pretty influential. I mean, what would the Supreme Court be without that today? McCulloch versus Maryland, which occurs in 1819. I'm not going to go into detail about that right now because that's something we're going to cover in greater detail at the end of the chapter. But then Gibbons versus Ogden, which occurs in 1824, and this just reestablishes the right of the national government, not the states, to regulate interstate commerce, which means inter, I-N-T-E-R prefix, means between states. So any sort of economic activity that involves multiple states, this case reaffirms the right of the national government to make those decisions, not the states themselves. The dispute stemmed from the state of New York essentially granting a company a monopoly to operate a steamboat service between New York and New Jersey and those waters shared by those two states. Well, a company from New Jersey essentially sued, claiming that like how could New York give a monopoly to something that impacted both New York and New Jersey? And Marshall's court agreed, saying that any sort of economic activity involving multiple states is like the sort of in the realm of like the powers of the national government. The states can regulate economic matters within their own state, but anything involving multiple states is sort of like the job and the powers of like the national government. So again, the beginning of our country's history tends to favor a stronger national government and weaker state governments.